everyone. I'm Ray Little. I'm your federal Green Party candidate right here in Simcoe North. I'm a longtime resident of Aurelia, and I've been in private business for about 20 years before hanging up my consulting shingle and joining the corporate landscape in roles like vice president at companies in Volvo, where I've been involved in the decarbonization of the automotive sector. Recently, I became very engaged in the political scene after seeing the decline in dialogue across our country, online, and even here locally. So, my goal for joining the campaign is to raise the dialogue and talk about issues important to you in Simcoe North. So, Steve, it's great to be here. Thanks for your own volunteerism and thanks to the Tiny Township Residents Alliance for the opportunity to connect with Simcoe North voters. Thank you. And thank you for your commitment to democracy.
All right. Well, again, thank you very much for being with us.
Yeah.
Um, as I discussed, it's going to be sort of a 30-minute question, not necessarily question answer, but just a discussion. We emailed
Thanks,
you,
Steve.
yeah, we emailed some of the like larger topics, so you'll be ready for them. So we'll start with affordability and cost of living. Everyday people in Tiny and across Simcoe County are feeling the pinch at the grocery store, at the gas pumps, and especially while trying to secure housing. What does your party plan to do that would make life more affordable for residents of rural communities like ours?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. First, as a bit of background, when I approach topics, I do so through the lens of sustainability and using the sustainability pillars people, planet, and prosperity. And so we'll start out this topic with people. Steve, are you aware that 20% of Canadians hold two-thirds of the wealth in Canada? And maybe even more interesting, 1% of Canadians hold 20% of the wealth in Canada. And yet, at the other end of the spectrum, we've got 30% of Canadians making $40,000 a year or less. So it's no wonder, Steve, that people in Simcoe North are accessing the Aurelia's sharing place. It's also known as the food bank. And when I visited there last week, they shared with me that they're supporting over 30% of Simcoe North residents with nutritional food. So, Steve, these people are also experiencing disproportionate costs as it relates to healthcare and housing issues. The reality in Canada is that inflation has grown faster than our wage increases. And our system of taxation was invented in 1917 and has been only modified incrementally through complicated legislation. Now, it has been adjusted for inflation, the individual tax brackets, but like I mentioned, our wages aren't keeping up with inflation. The net result to us is that we've got over 800 lines on our income tax forms. And the government is failing, the system of taxation is failing to recognize small businesses and a segment that the government says is incredibly important to us. So, rest assured, Simcoe North residents, I take this topic seriously and I'm a champion of modernizing our tax system. I'll take an opportunity to highlight here that the Green Party has actually put forward a structural income tax proposal this election. That proposal is to eliminate taxes paid by people who make $40,000 a year or less. And this will deliver $6,000 into the pockets of Canadians that need it the most. And the Greens are fiscally responsible. For every promise we make, we tell people how we're going to pay for it. And in this case, we're proposing a 1% increase in corporate tax rates. Companies that pay less taxes than Canadian citizens in order to pay for this promise. And I'll contrast this great proposal with the two main parties' proposals. First, they're suggesting a 2 to 2.5 reduction in 2.5% reduction in the lowest income tax bracket for all Canadians. And this amounts between 500 and $1,000 a year. The Conservatives, incidentally, also propose a tax reduction for corporations. As far as I know, neither party has told us how they're going to pay for it. I encourage Simcoe North residents to see this for what it is: a cheap promise to buy your vote with no corresponding means of paying for it. Clearly, the Green Party's proposal to address this topic is structural and does begin to address affordability. Myself and the Green Party also advocate for modernizing our housing and healthcare systems, and these costs directly impact affordability. The bottom line, Steve, is that we've reached near crisis stage on affordability and the cost of living. I hope to demonstrate to Simcoe North residents that a governance model focused on prosperity, people, and planet are keys to survival while providing a path to generational wealth. We've published a series of articles on the Simcoe North Green Party website, and we invite people to check those out. Steve?
All right, thank you. That was very thorough. Thanks. We'll move on to climate and the environment. So Tiny Township is known for some of the cleanest water in the world, and residents deeply care about the environment. What's your party's climate plan? How will you affect or protect places like French's Hill?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Um, First of all, I believe Simcoe North voters recognize the recent ice storm for what it is: tangible evidence of climate change. Now, Steve, I'm planning to talk about French's Hill in the section where we have devoted to water and aggregate
Okay.
extraction.
Yep.
So I'm going to talk about a couple of other things environment related here. But first, did you know that the Green Party is fiscally responsible in their pursuit of environmental equity? The Green Party is the only federal party that has a costed policy platform for every federal election since we became a national party in 1987. And the Greens are the only party, not conservative, that is promising a balanced federal budget in the next 5 years. This fiscally conservative stance comes from the Green Party's European heritage. In fact, the Green Party is a powerhouse in elected government positions around the world, and we adapt for Canada many policies from Green Party sources outside our country. Locally, Steve, I'd suggest to voters that the Conservative Party is still actually what was the Reform Party, a party that is focused on supporting big business and tax cuts for corporations, not average Canadians, and most certainly not rural voters. They've just hijacked the name in hopes of maintaining a relationship with what were progressive conservative voters. I believe reformers, conservatives, are deceiving progressive conservative Ontarians, and I encourage progressive minded people to take a good look at the Green Party's fiscal policies. I believe that people will conclude exactly the same way I did: Greens are fiscally responsible.
Okay.
Now, I know I got on my soapbox, Steve, but I'll get back to the environment.
That's
We
okay.
did we did have an ice storm here locally, Steve.
We did.
Um, I've been end to end in the riding, and I've watched and I've seen the devastation to our tree canopy, Steve, and the trees that have fallen down. And I'd ask, how many people in our riding are out of pocket recovering from this ice storm, even if it's just cleaning up or property damage or throwing out food because we lost our electricity? I'd encourage people to consider this a tax, a climate tax. The Green Party has several policies backing up our commitment to the environment, including, but not limited to, recognizing the cost of carbon. And we're maintaining that position at the cost of all of the negative rhetoric out there on this topic. But, and I'll admit this is ironic, Steve, But the green support for environmental equity is actually where our true fiscal conservatism is rooted. I realize I need to explain. First, I assert the most wealthy among us are receiving environmental and social subsidies by not including these costs in the products and services they sell. Steve, tires are a good example. When we buy a new set of tires, we dispose of the old set. When we do, we incur a fee. It's called a tire tax. I assert that tax should be included in the cost of the tire and form part of the sale price. Putting it in the sale price would do two things. First, it puts the cost inside the product. Second, in an effort to be competitive, manufacturers of tires will innovate and reduce the environmental burden of tires, just as they do with all of the other costs in their product. So the net effect they're trying to get to is to reduce the sale price to their clients, and this results in a couple of different things. First, we eliminate the environmental subsidies these guys are now taking as profit. We reduce the environmental impact through innovation, and we decrease the taxes you and I pay. My own commitment to the environment spans my personal and my professional life. I spent most of my careers decarbonizing the public transportation business. In fact, I was a guest speaker at COP27. So, Steve, the Greens are leaders on the environment, and so am I.
All right, that's great. Thank you. So we'll move on to rural infrastructure and the economy. So rural areas like ours often feel left behind out of federal conversations about jobs and growth. Yet small businesses and agriculture are our backbone here. What steps would you take and your party to eliminate barriers between provinces to create a more seamless trade or free trade between the provinces?
Yeah, interprovincial trade topic, Steve, and I am going to cover that one. With respect to this issue of rural infrastructure and economic development, I'm going to focus mostly on the prosperity aspect of this one. And I would just recognize that consecutive governments' economic policies have decimated what we know as the family farm and our rural communities. You know, Steve, our rural communities produce some of the most overachieving, proud Canadians I know. They're characteristically hard workers with good values and care about one another. I should know I'm one of them. Sometimes, though, people like me are lucky to escape the drug and alcohol addiction resulting from the lack of infrastructure investment in our communities, like recreational facilities and schools. Steve, rural communities, in many cases, have issues similar to what our government identifies as remote locations. And people in rural settings have higher costs with limited access to things like public transit, food banks, and other nonprofit community support infrastructure that most urban centers just assume exist. I witnessed firsthand, Steve, the neglect of rural infrastructure when the high school closed in the community where I grew up. This happened about 20 years ago during what the conservatives called at the time the common sense revolution. And around that time, I spoke with a retired school principal who shared with me that he was part of a group of people consulted on what to do with rural schools. He told me the advice he gave was that if rural residents could shop at big box stores in neighboring towns, that's where they could send their kids to school. Excuse me, Steve. The logic was that tax revenue generated by rural business was insufficient to support the schools. And he was convinced that people in these rural communities would understand. Steve, the same logic has led to substantial reductions in local healthcare services. Where I grew up, in the town of Seaforth of about 2,200 people, Many of us rural, I can tell you, some are very angry, and we do not understand it. Steve, what I do understand is that companies like Walmart, Costco, and other big box stores calculate the spending power of the entire region before locating their stores. Of course, they put the physical location in the largest center in the region. Sorry, Steve, just taking a moment. I can tell you that the people in Seaforth are pretty loyal to the local merchants. They know them by their first name and their kids play together. But we did go to Stratford a couple of times a year to buy things we couldn't get locally, grab a Big Mac, and generally do some shopping. My entire point, Steve, is that it's the tax system that required adjustment, not the schools. The federal, provincial, and municipal taxes of big box stores need to be redistributed across the region on which they form the basis to locate. Canada recognizes this issue on digital commerce, but so far, both the Conservatives and Liberals fail to understand the rural dynamic. Our successive governments have at best disrespected rural communities. And from my perspective, Steve, they've neglected them. They've treated them unfairly and left them to rot.
Okay.
All of this to say,
Yep.
I clearly understand the need for economic development in rural areas, and you can count on me to champion this in a way that Ottawa can understand. The fact is, our rural communities in Canada disproportionately contribute to the well being of 80% of the other people living in urban centers. And when we modernize our tax system, it needs to account for this. Now, I do have some uplifting news to share with Simcoe North residents. First, I'm a sustainability advocate, and I champion a concept called the 160-mile diet. It's a little more catchy than the 160-kilometer version. This idea, Steve, suggests that we can obtain the nutrition we need within a 100-mile radius of where we live. And you can bet that I'll be at as many local markets as I can, and I'll be encouraging grocery stores and restaurants and Simcoe North residents to attend the stands of our folks at the markets. There's also a really fast rising trend called ecotourism. And in such a beautiful riding like ours, I think this dovetails nicely into the sustainability message where we can create some prosperity by taking care of our local environment and promoting some tourism. So, Steve, when you combine tax reform, the 100-mile diet, ecotourism, and with my already proposed development of the Cross Canada Corridor and Ontario's Ring of Fire, and you pair that with modernization of healthcare and housing, this becomes a huge boost to rural communities. I've got articles published on all of these topics on the Simcoe North Green Party website, and I invite constituents to check those out.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Where are we next? We're moving on to water security and aggregate extraction. So in Tiny, we've seen firsthand what happens when aggregate extraction or water taking puts our environment and quality of life at risk. Where does your party stand on the regulation of aggregate extraction and groundwater protection?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I'm really glad we're talking about this. We live in such a large riding, Steve, that
Mhm.
oftentimes what's happening on the west side of the riding is not reported or well known on the east side of the riding. So there's one thing that does unite us on the water topic, and that's the fact that 30% of all Simcoe North residents get their water from wells. So we're going to be talking quite a bit about the planet on this one, Steve. Um, in 2017, a natural resources study told Simcoe North that our water supply would be in jeopardy in 10 years if our population continued to grow and our consumption rates remain the same. Today, I'm hearing through casual conversations about people's wells going dry, and I've also heard about people having to relocate their wells on their existing lots.
Mhm.
Now, Have I heard enough to think that there's a statistical trend out there? I'm not sure about that, but I would bet money that these are stories are canaries in the coal mine. The Rescue Lake Simcoe Coalition and the Simcoe County Greenbelt Coalition, these are organizations that represent a few other nonprofit groups in our area. They're telling us that if we don't intervene, Lake Simcoe is going to be toxic in 35 years. And today, Steve, we've got over a dozen high volume quarries extracting aggregates out of our riding here in Simcoe North. Now, please know I'm all for the economic activity and the benefits that brings to our community. It's just that there's one in particular I'd like to mention here. This particular quarry is extracting aggregate at a site scientifically proven to produce the world's most pure drinking water. Steve, more pure than water from the Ice Age.
Hmm.
This particular quarry, however, is extracting aggregate from that site and drawing water to clean it before shipping it out to the urban centers it serves. Generally a good business model, but let me rephrase. The foreign owned conglomerate is using the purest drinking water the entire world has ever seen to clean gravel it's
Hmm.
extracting from the same site that's producing the water.
Yeah.
Steve, this is really important for all Simcoe North voters. So I'm sorry, I'm going to repeat it. I want to spread this message as widely as I can. This company is extracting, at the very least, part of the filter bed, then drawing the cleanest water in the world produced from that filter bed and use it to cleanse the materials it sells, and then dumps the residue back into the land. How is it possible in today's version of Canada that this is happening? Steve, how is it possible that consecutive elected conservative representatives in our riding have not brought this forward to the ruling government and their leadership? There must be a solution to this dilemma. There's hundreds of sites across Simcoe North where aggregates can be extracted. How is it possible this problem hasn't been solved? Simcoe North residents can count on me. And if you don't see it already, I'm the guy that stands up to bullies. I'm the guy that has the patience to work to find a solution that respects people, planet, and prosperity. And I'm the guy that can sell the solution to government.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. We'll move on to trust in government and democratic reform. As oops, sorry, I lost my sheet here. So many people here increasingly feel cynical about politicians and government and feel that the government doesn't listen or deliver. How would you personally help rebuild trust in government amongst the voters here?
Yeah. Steve, I love this topic. You know, the Green Party and I are champions of modernizing our electoral systems. I'm posting about it widely across the riding and talking about it every chance I get. The fact is our current system has divided Canadians and has led to some pretty negative dialogue across the country, online, and even locally. I believe, like you said, is mostly the outcome of people being frustrated with not being heard. People aren't being heard for a couple of reasons. First, their party fails to become elected. And second, political parties are making promises they don't keep. So when voices aren't heard, people become frustrated and even angry. They then develop distrust for the people and the system. And then, Steve, they stop voting. And this issue is further exacerbated when political parties make empty or at least very cheap promises to disaffected voters in order to gain their vote, but ignore those same voters after they're elected. I'll use an example highlighting the need for electoral reform. Somewhere around 2006, there was a provincial election in New Brunswick. In that election, the Liberals secured 51% of the popular vote. And with that, they gained 100% of the seats in Parliament. So 49% of the people did not even have a voice at the table. What happened the next election, Steve? Voters kicked him out, got a conservative majority. And then what happened? The Conservatives rolled back some of the previous policies implemented by the Liberal government. And this pattern, Steve, is playing out across every province in the country, and it's playing out in our federal election cycles. This is costing Canadians billions and billions of dollars in policy reversals. And the same politicians scratch their heads wondering why Canada's productivity lags behind that of other developed nations. Steve, the only solution I see to this is structural change to Canada's electoral system, and we need to devise some way that increases voter turnout. Whether we can secure the internet well enough for online voting, I'm not sure, but we've got to do something for Canadians here. And Simcoe North can count on me to work to find a solution and getting electoral modernization into our system.
All right, perfect. We're gonna focus a little bit on foreign affairs, kind of have to in this day and age with Mr. Trump and all his rhetoric. Um, so, how do you view the prospect of a second Trump presidency in terms of Canada's economic stability and diplomatic relationship?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Um, I guess to start off, and as a part of a small confession, if viewers haven't noticed already, I'm a business guy.
Hmm.
Um, I'm actually an accountant by education, Steve. I've also earned an MBA, and I have all the educational requirements for a certified management consultant, although I don't practice in that profession. I have done business for the past 30 years across the entire United States, so I understand this issue very well. I recognize that the tariff issue has called into question our sovereignty, and I'm very proud to see Canadians rallying around a common goal. I also understand the emotion here, and I confess that I myself have experienced them. But if you'd please permit me a bit of latitude here, I'd like to point out that tariffs are largely economic in nature. And as an accountant, it's my experience that numbers generally don't have emotion. This hasn't been widely covered by the press, but I believe the bottom line is that our southern neighbor is experiencing a massive deficit and debt crisis like the one we experienced in Canada in the late 90s. In parallel, the elected person down south has promised some tax cuts. These are very expensive problems the US is dealing with right now, and it's approaching crisis levels. I believe tariffs are the US leaders' method of selling a GST like across the board tax on all Americans in order to balance their budget. So, Trump has introduced a fictional boogeyman and he's going to slap tariffs on them to set things right. Ultimately, he's trying to eliminate the deficit, begin paying off the debt, and deliver a tax cut. Now, Steve, if reports are correct, during an informal but high level meeting at the onset of tariffs, the guy that told us national budgets balance themselves made a serious tactical error telling Trump we couldn't survive across the board tariffs, resulting in Trump spontaneously and, of course, brilliantly problem solving by riffing on the idea that Canada could just become the next state. And well, we know the rest, right? So I agree, elbows up Canada, and let's unite on a mission to solve this largely economic issue. It's just that I suggest we take a walk quietly and carry a very big stick approach. In this way, we start out capitalizing on one of Canada's strengths, punching well above our weight diplomatically. And I'll use a hockey example here. A great hockey game, like a playoff hockey game, is fought by highly trained professionals who deliver bone crushing checks and demonstrate their heart and soul digging pucks out of the corners. Good playoff hockey doesn't usually include dropping the gloves or animated expressions of anger. Not to mention, the team we're going up against supposedly has the artful Gretzky as a business leader. But seriously, they do have the most powerful economy and the most powerful military in the world. So, choosing pressure points, exploiting weaknesses, mounting a defense, and a strategy to gain and maintain puck possession is likely to be far more effective than picking a bombastic, emotion fueled fight for this particular playoff series. Economically, Steve, our 28 game marathon begins after this election, and I
Mhm.
support some of the tactics already deployed by Team Canada. I support strategic counter tariffs, and I support early renegotiation of a Can Am deal built on the back of CUSMA, but I'd suggest a direct free trade agreement with Mexico after a Can Am deal. You know, the Green Party has published a series of measures, and I myself have produced a series of articles detailing economic development projects that will help Canada survive this tariff situation today while leading to generational prosperity long term. These projects I'm going to summarize here. The first is the Cross Canada Corridor, Steve. It includes hydroelectricity lines across the country, high speed rail across the country, Alberta pipelines across the country. And today, Steve, I'm introducing the idea of electricity lines underneath the Atlantic to mainland Europe. The second thing is developing Ontario's Ring of Fire. The third is eliminating provincial trade barriers. The fourth is adopting Buy Canada policies when the government projects utilize taxpayer money. And finally, Steve, I propose modernizing Canada's healthcare, housing, and taxation systems. Steve, all my proposals improve our environment, include plans for taking care of our people, and increase our prosperity. Canada also needs to restart the C.D. Howe Type Institute, focused on Canada's industrial development. This 1950s era initiative was incredibly successful, and this time we include the pillars of people, planet, and prosperity. I would point out, Steve, the other two jokers who've governed Canada for over 100 years have so far failed to eliminate provincial trade barriers. Why should we trust anything they say this time? When you take all of these green proposals together, we've got a clear plan for surviving this mess today and creating a stronger, more resilient Canada for tomorrow. We'll increase Canada's productivity, we'll increase our economic activity through research and development, along with special one time infrastructure investments, leading to an increase in the value of the Canadian dollar, increasing employment, reducing interest rates, decreasing income taxes, and balancing the budget. The Green Party and I are delivering real solutions and real plans to survive the tariff issue and build generational wealth for Canadians. Steve, we're in the economic playoffs now.
All right, we definitely are for sure. Well, that brings us to almost the end of the conversation. Um, Ray, do appreciate you stepping in and letting us know where you stand. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we end this?
You know, Steve, I'm really grateful for the opportunity to reach out to Simcoe North residents. I would say one of the biggest challenges I've had as a candidate is actually getting in front of people and learning about their topics. I found it humbling to be rejected by many of the mainstream Facebook groups and mainstream media. And I found it incredibly difficult to get the message out there. So, this is an open invitation to all Simcoe North residents to reach out to me via Facebook, via email, via the Simcoe North Green Party website. And I'm very much looking forward to participating in the election on the 28th. I encourage everyone to get out to vote.
All right. Again, thanks very much, Ray, and I wish you all the best in the election.
Thank you.
All right. Have a great day.
Yeah, you too.